This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Evening, everyone. Hope we're all okay this evening. You are back on the Twilight Show with me, Ben Thomas. I've got a very special guest on tonight. Well, they're all special guests, really, but I've got a gentleman who is new to the TTR world, so we'll be discussing all things pastoral in just a moment with Paul Hazard.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
I normally do this show every 2 weeks, but I've got quite a few guests coming up, so I'm actually in the kind of a groove of doing it once a week at the moment. Anyway, hope you're all good. I think most people have gone back to, I say gone back to work, but actually gone back to school physically this week. It's, what is it, second day into the summer term. And I won't bore you with what I was doing today, but I was working on a spreadsheet this afternoon. I was literally falling asleep. So if like me, already you're all set for the weekend, keep going. We're nearly there. I've got Paul Hazard on the show tonight. We're going to be talking all things pastoral. Obviously, a huge part of the modern day education sphere. Paul's actually got a show. He's got his debut show coming up on Thursday between 9 and 10 p.m. So we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later on in the show. But I can see he is connecting or connected. So, Paul, are you there, sir?
Yes, you should be able to hear me, can you?
Fantastic, and we can hear your Northern Irish accent coming through loud and clear. How are you today?
Great. I'm great. Absolutely fantastic. It's a smashing day here in Northern Ireland. It's one of those sunshine spring days. It really just lifts the soul. So I'm fantastic.
Good. Well, it's lovely to have you on this show. Obviously, you've got your debut show coming up later on this week. But when we were kind of what the show could be about, I was very keen, and I kind of had it in the diary, if you like, to talk about the pastoral element of teaching, whether that's secondary or primary or any education sphere, really. And Paul very graciously sent me his quite extensive CV. I have to say, I felt like I was almost interviewing for the job, but I kind of had something in mind, and he fit the bill perfectly. I'll kind of let him talk about his 38 years of educational experience in a minute. But, very, very pleased to have Paul on the show. So before we start to get into the kind of the nitty gritty of it, do you want to just kind of talk to the audience a little bit about your experience, Paul, and kind of where you've been and what your journey's been up until this point, really?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Well, as you say, 38 years teaching. I qualified in 1985. And I was qualified to teach English, French, and as we all were in those days, ICT. But instead of getting a job here, I went to France, and I taught in northern France near the Belgian border for 2 years. In those days, EU regulations wouldn't let you stay on, even though I wanted to stay there. So after 2 years, I came back, and I got jobs teaching here in Northern Ireland. I've always taught post-primary, 11 to 18. Started off in a girls' grammar school, moved around, and then in 1990, I got a job in a medium-sized post-primary, around about 500 to 600 pupils. And more or less, with a few exceptions, I've been there ever since. I've done a range of things in that school. In fact, I think the only subject I haven't taught is maths, believe it or not, because when you get a job here in Northern Ireland, basically you have to teach what's on your timetable and whoever's in front of you. So I've taught music, geography, science, history, all sorts of things. But that's it. I had a couple of periods out. I was an education advisor, largely responsible for guiding senior management on all aspects pastoral, and in particular, were the inspectorate, Ofsted, if you like, but we call them an ETI, Education Training Inspectorate here in Northern Ireland. Where there were issues in a school, I would go in and try and support them through any difficulties and get them back on the straight and narrow and so on. So I really enjoyed my time as an education advisor. I've also been a lecturer, and although I'm retired now, I still do a little bit of lecturing in education. I really, really enjoy that. Teaching a couple of master's courses that are very exciting. We do some great stuff. So really, that's me in a nutshell. That's my 38 years.
I mean, that's quite a big nutshell, isn't it, Paul? Really, it's there's a lot of things covered there. Really, it's interesting you said you'd never taught maths, because that would not go down very well in the current political climate with
Oh no, it
Mr.
wouldn't.
Sunak's idea of everyone teaching maths or getting more maths teachers in. But
Yeah,
you talked. I mean, there's quite a lot to unpick there. Really, I guess one of the things that you said, and obviously looking through what you'd sent to me as well, was the idea that you taught on the French Belgian border. What was that like, going from sort of Northern Ireland to a very different, well, quite literally a foreign country, to pardon the pun, but like what was that like?
Oh, it was fantastic. Absolutely great. You go to school, you do your A levels, you go to university, hopefully you have a great time and so on. And the next thing is, you catapult yourself into Europe, into France. You're speaking foreign languages. I was in a small village called Saint-Amand-les-Eaux, tiny, tiny little place near Lille, not far from Brussels. So, maybe life's more about your kind of social life and going out. And one of the things we used to do at night is say, well, where will we go tonight? And our options were, Belgium, Holland, Germany, Switzerland. That's just geographically where we were, and that was really easy to do that kind of thing. But I loved it. I really immersed myself in that local community. I played rugby for the local team. Just did what I can, made as many friends and contacts as I could. It was eye-opening. It's a very different system of education. Although I was young, I didn't have much experience of our own system here then, but it was just fantastic and a great start, I think, to a teaching career.
And what made you come back? Was it, different job back in Northern Ireland? Was it just you'd had enough by then, or you didn't get that professional rugby contract? And what was it that brought you back to Northern Ireland, really?
Yeah, they must have tricked not taking me there as a professional rugby player, didn't they, really? No, I would love to have stayed. The difficulty was EU regulations didn't allow you to stay in those days. Can't remember what we called it, but was it open borders or whatever we called it, whereby everybody at one stage was allowed to take up jobs in different countries and so on. But that was just before that. So my contract was up, and in fact, it had been extended. It was only for 1 year. I had to get permission for an extension, which I got. And then that was it. Contract was up and I had to come home.
Okay. And was it difficult to kind of readjust to being home, or was it one of those things where actually it was quite straightforward and you just kind of slotted back into life back in Northern Ireland, or was it quite a difficult transitional period for you at that time?
Well, I couldn't say it was difficult. I was resigned to coming home. There's no doubt of that. So I just kind of stoically accepted that. It's a very, very different life in mainland Europe. There was a whole sense of freedom and, mixing with everybody. There's all that inspiration with different languages and foods and everything. And I suppose, yes, it's a little bit of a come down to return to little old Northern Ireland here. I suppose we were kind of at the peak of the Troubles then. It was before the Good Friday Agreement and so on. We soldiers on the street. We couldn't go to shops without showing our bags, emptying our pockets, being searched and so on. Very limited in where we could go and things, That didn't really affect people like me too much, but you were aware that this is a different climate, it's a different happening, it's a different kind of sense about the place. And I suppose I missed being in Europe. Love going back on holidays, of course. And I do kind of just, there's something like the key in the lock goes back into that sense of youth and freedom and kind of vibrancy for life and so on. That's not to say that we don't have it here in Northern Ireland. We certainly do. But there's just something different about Europe and languages and people.
Yeah, I mean, it's ironic, isn't it? Because, you look at the current climate now in terms of being a teacher, and, whether they're serious or kind of half-heartedly joking, there's a lot of people that are looking, for a main reason really in terms of moving to Scotland or Wales, in terms of the pay progression and the kind of the pay scales that are available. But it's quite interesting that you were doing this kind of 30 years ago, 35 years ago, whatever it was. And kind of having that experience that a lot of people really are starting to look at for different reasons now. I think it's we could do a whole separate podcast on location and teaching, and Australia is always quite a good one. I've worked with quite a few people that have moved to kind of Australia and Dubai and places like that. So it's quite interesting to me, as someone who's been doing this job for 15, 16 years, that this was kind of almost a thing, all those years ago. So in some ways, Paul, you're a bit of a pioneer really in that respect, I'd imagine. I can't believe there was too many people doing it at that time. So it's good to hear those experiences.
Well, you have to think, I'd love to be able to say that's true, but it was part of my degree. You have to remember that, my degree's in French. So, everybody who did a modern language and was going on to be a teacher did have a placement year. For one reason or another, mine had to be at the end of my degree after I'd actually done, the studying and so on. But that was just a personal thing. There was no other way around that due to just some personal circumstances that had happened. So much as I'd love to claim to have been a pioneer, I can't.
Well, I think it's good, Paul, because we have we have a range of people that listen to these shows in terms of where they're at in their career, where they're at in terms of whether they're a class teacher, senior leaders. So it's good to kind of to get a variety of different viewpoints and kind of share that really. And I always like to kind of dive into people's experiences in terms of where they've been, where they are now, and where they want to go. So it's really interesting to talk to you on that. And just kind of picking up, obviously, if people should be aware, I guess, but the Troubles were obviously a huge and difficult period for Northern Ireland. But, you mentioned that you were working in a school at that point, and, you talked about the issues with kind of moving around freely and showing badges and stuff like that. I mean, we're obviously here to talk about pastoral elements of school, but I'm assuming that period of your career must have taught you an awful lot about the other side of teaching in terms of the social work and the emotional elements of students and things like that. So was that kind of quite a grounding experience for you in terms of your career overall?
I think when you live here and when you've grown up here, you kind of have a sense of, this is the way life is, this is how it goes. And, as I said, I wasn't too affected by the Troubles. And plenty of people were, and I would have taught plenty of people who were affected by it. And in different ways, not always directly or not always, through direct violence or whatever. But yes, it was always there. You were more aware of it than you were witnessing it, I suppose. That's kind of my sense. And yes, when you're dealing with groups, you do have to be cognizant of who you're talking to and how what you're saying might be picked up and so on, But I suppose one of the earliest maybe direct encounters I had with the Troubles was I taught French, as I told you, and I taught a guy called, I'll not tell you his name, but he was a great student, super student, definitely an A student in my book. And as a teacher, you love your A students. And we came to the day of the exam and he didn't turn up. Now, what we would have done very pastorally in my school is the principal would have allowed us to jump in the car, go to the house, find out what's going on, get him in, do the exam, and so on. And I drove to the house and I knocked on the door, and his mummy said, "Mr. Hazard, I'm very sorry, he won't be going in today." I said, "But look, he's done all this work, he's in for an A, and this is going to be dreadful." And she said, "No, I'll never get him out of bed." And I said, "Well, why not?" And she said, "Well, he had to be up throwing stones over the peace wall last night." And, that kind of thing happened. People forget, those kind of incidental things that went on as part of the Troubles. It wasn't all direct violence. It was, things that curtailed our lives and so on.
Mm.
Turns out he didn't come in, he didn't do his exam, and he was my star student. Such a pity.
That's quite a story, isn't it? I mean, it's always dependent on where you work and the kind of experiences that your cohorts and children and students have. But there will be, I'm sure, a number of educators, your age and who experience that kind of thing. And that's quite, for me to hear that's quite a sobering thing, really. And I guess it doesn't, I wouldn't say it would, I mean, obviously I can't speak for how you feel about it, but I guess there is a point where it kind of hardens you a little bit, and you kind of become a bit more aware of not just, as you say, kind of passing exams and going through the education system. You're dealing really with kind of young adults and how they see the world. And when you've got something like the Troubles going on, around you and on your doorstep, and as you said, kind of almost hanging over you and being there, it must change, or it must have changed kind of how you dealt really, in terms of the students you had. And I guess really,
I think it definitely, yeah.
Sorry, Paul, go for it. Yeah.
No, it definitely does. And you do get a sense of, their lives are just more than the half hour that's in front of you, or certainly I did. And I was always looking to do things with students that would, enhance the quality of their lives, that would really kind of allow them to see that they had lots of opportunities, and all they had to do was kind of shrug off the parochialism and, embrace the big world that's out there. And I always loved this idea of doing things with students that would kind of raise all the boats, just in the way the tide comes in and raises all the boats. And one of the ways, I thought I could be most effective in doing that was making sure that anywhere I worked, that ethos, that pastoral care was of such quality that would allow, kind of a ring of safety so that students could be themselves, they could have their dreams, they could have their wishes. And, at least for 6 hours a day with us, they could try their best to fulfill their potential and so on. Funny, we're going to look at that on Thursday night in the Late Late Show, 9 to 10. I have a fantastic guest, Alistair Hamill, coming on. He's an expert practitioner in what we now call shared education, because we have a number of systems here in Northern Ireland, which, we've kind of got our ordinary system, which in Northern Ireland is probably fair to say it's sectarian, and sectarian in the best sense of the word. As in that, we've got a Catholic system, and then we have, if you like, a Protestant system, which was handed over to the state, I think at some stage in the 30s. Around about 1980, 81 or so on, we introduced what's called the integrated system. And that integrated system allowed Catholic and Protestant pupils to go to one school, and indeed all sorts of other religions and so on, to go to one school.
Paul, have you just plugged your show and my show, Paul? Is that how this has worked? How the tables have turned?
I've just done that.
No, but look, that's relevant to what we're talking about, and that's really, really excited for what you're going to do. Just going back,
keep me focused.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just going back to that comment about what you made about the boats rising and kind of having a safety net. It's really interesting because when I first started out as a well, they were called NQTs in those days. It's ECT now, and I can never keep up with what they keep changing them. But the title now is ECT for anyone that's kind of newish to the profession. And the head teacher I had, he was absolutely brilliant. He was kind of coming to the end of his career, and he'd been in the job for a long time, but he was brilliant for me personally, and the stuff that he said. And on the very first day, he said to me, we always try and teach our children to kind of leave their baggage at the front door. And I was like, what's he on about? What's he talking about? And I didn't know how to do that, of course. I was only like, what he said, that comment stuck with me massively and has done. And I to other people now, because you can't completely block out, and ridiculous to assume you can, but the life experiences of the children you teach. But by kind of terming it as a kind of a physical element, in some cases, it does help a little bit in terms of actually, getting the children to invest in what you're doing with them academically, but pastorally in school. So that's something that's stuck with me, and clearly, your kind of your metaphor for it has stuck with you as well. And I guess it kind of leads me on to say the first point. We've been talking for 20 minutes, would you believe it or not? But, in terms of what I really wanted to discuss today with your help really was what, for you personally, what does pastoral actually mean? Because there'll be some people listening to this and maybe saw the show title and just thought, oh, here's that word again, a little bit like well-being, a little bit like safeguarding. But, what does the pastoral element of what you did in your career and are still doing to some extent mean to you, Paul?
Yeah. Well, to me, it's very much the lifeblood of the school. I used to be very friendly with Professor Ron Best. I think he taught at was it Essex and maybe at Roehampton as well. And there's somewhere in one of his books he's written, I don't know if it's a chapter, but it's certainly the heading for a paragraph. The school is the pastoral is the school. And it might sound a little bit twee and a little bit manufactured, but I really believe that. I think that's really true. So for me, the pastoral is very much about, nourishing people. It's about meeting the person where they're at. It's about having a contact with them, and so on. I think it's really, really important for school. That whole, I suppose, a kind of cluster of terms: ethos, climate, pastoral care, culture, and so on. They're what the pastoral are to me, and they have an enormous influence on us. We can teach directly and didactically, and you can learn your French verbs and so on, but how you learn them, the ambience, the atmosphere, the feel, and the way in which you learn those things, and how that teacher and those teachers and those people relate to you, that will dictate an awful lot of the person that you become. And I always think that, yes, we teach individual subjects. We may teach 2, 3, 5 subjects, but our job is nonetheless to help to kind of bring to fruition that little person, that human being, to send them off out into the world, as complete as we can send them at the age they're at. The reverse, I suppose, of it is to think about ourselves as teachers and think, who were the people that influenced us? And, I would say with a fair degree of certainty, it will not be the person who taught you, your French verb. Well, it could be the person, but you're not influenced by them because of the French verbs they taught you. You're influenced because of how they related, the person they were, how they treated you, the esteem in which they held you. So for me, pastoral care is, very much the school. And it's often felt more in its absence, if you like. It's a bit like the oxygen in the air. We kind of take it for granted. It's there. We go about our business. But when it's gone, we suddenly realize how crucial, how central, how important it is to everything that we do.
I mean, it's, what fascinated listening to you, because I really like talking. I really like talking anyway, but I really like talking about the pastoral element of education. And I think what's been really good for me personally is that it's not it's kind of not an element anymore, even though I've just called it that. It's I've always found it said, I think you used the word ambience, and the kind of setting and the mood and everything else is more important potentially than what you're teaching. And I kind of learned very quickly in my career that I needed to play to my strengths. I like to be tidy. I like people to be polite and respectful. I like to make sure that, or like to make sure that my classes were engaging and inviting from an environmental point of view. And I had lots of different roles that were kind of curriculum based, but I just didn't enjoy them. And I knew that I preferred, the kind of behavior element, the safeguarding element, if you can ever prefer safeguarding, but just the kind of idea that, one day I knew that I wanted to have children, and I wanted to make sure that what I was doing in the classroom would be what I would expect for them, if that makes sense, in a kind of a long drawn out wheel. But I knew that I didn't want to do social work because I like teaching as well. Like, I like those kind of, seeing the progression, the academic progression with children. But, that kind of, teachers treated pupils as kind of human beings is such a, to a lot of people listening, it would be such an obvious comment, and they'll be thinking, okay, why is that even being said and debated? But actually, even in, as you said, in your experience, in my experience, I had teachers that just didn't like people, let alone children. And the ones that I did, were topics I didn't enjoy. Maths, there we go again. But I liked it because the teacher I had in secondary school always without fail just asked how I was and kind of welcomed me in. And what was really interesting about it, know who he didn't like. And it was very obvious in the classes that I was in that there were teachers that just knew, you just knew straight away they didn't like certain people. So it's a really pertinent point. And you've kind of summed up really nicely why it's so vital and why it's so important. And it's really, I don't want to, because obviously you're lecturing now, and you'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But when we have kind of students coming through, it's not something that's really discussed properly, I feel, at the training stage. Would you kind of agree with that assessment? Obviously, I know you're based in Northern Ireland, but certainly in England, there's a big part of it of just getting it right. And with pastoral, it's kind of, you either do it or you don't. Would you kind of agree with that assessment?
And obviously, that's a question that puts me in a difficult position. It's partly my responsibility to do something about that. I do think, yes, I think it's difficult to do a lot on pastoral early on at that initial teacher training stage. I do think your ability to be pastoral benefits from having some life experience, just some more. I think young teachers, trainee teachers and young teachers are busy learning their craft. And I think that's fine. I think that's great. I think we need to be expert, well-crafted teachers. I think that's very, very, very important. But I think, like you said, as you go through and you begin to acquire, the skills and capabilities that are difficult to teach in teacher training, you begin to see that there's a lot more than just the manner in which someone will learn their French verbs or something. It's got to do with how you relate to them, how you present to them. And it's really about making that deep, unique and distinctly human contact with them that allows them to be inspired. You can't just inspire someone by telling them, right, be inspired, go and learn those verbs. But, you can relate to them in ways that kind of, are very profound, that make them want to work hard. Not necessarily just for you, but for themselves, because that's ideally what we want. We want them to be self-motivated, confident, enterprising young people. So yes, there is no doubt that universities need to address the pastoral. Young teachers heading out into schools need to know what it is. There are certain aspects of the pastoral, like child protection and so on and so forth, drug education, personal social education, and those sorts of things that they need to know a lot about. They may well end up teaching personal social education, so they need to know how do you teach about relationships and sexuality, or SRE, I think they call it in England. How do you teach about alcohol and drugs and so on and so forth? Those are critical things, and they're skills-based things. But pastoral in its wider sense, literally being there for those students, is a broader thing. It comes with life experience. You can still be young. Chronologically, you can be young and be extraordinarily pastoral. But I think for many, it kind of comes with experience.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about training and skills right after this break.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out! Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading!
And we do love happy reading, happy development, happy pastoral skills, all on Teachers Talk Radio. So, you're listening live with me, Ben Thomas, on the Tuesday Twilight Show with my brand new guest. He's never appeared on one of these before, to my knowledge, Paul Hazard, as I quietly cough and lose my voice. So, we've covered, we're going for, I say going, but we've been talking for about 31 minutes, 32 minutes, something like that. And we've covered quite a range already, and it's, as I said, it's fascinating listening to you, both in terms of your experiences, but the kind of outlook that you have with, for me and I guess for many other people, such a vital, almost natural part of school. Like it's very clear to me that you have a passion for it, and obviously you said right at the start of the show, you talked a little bit around your career path and what that led to you to. And obviously most recently you've been a kind of a lecturer, or are still a lecturer. I guess, putting you thinking about where you are now and thinking about my experiences with, training on and upskilling on kind of pastoral elements of school. Do you kind of feel that there is enough? You talked before the ad break, and you're very right to do so in terms of experience, but do you feel that in the current educational environment, when we've got sound bites and policies being thrown around, particularly in this country, around maths teaching and do this and do that and all the rest of it, do you feel like there is enough focus and kind of drive behind the pastoral elements to not just train new teachers or want to be teachers, but existing teachers in your experience?
Yeah, I suppose most of my experience is in Northern Ireland here. And, we do certainly in Northern Ireland believe that the pastoral is essential. It's absolutely crucial to what we do. It's there in our policies, our programs, our day-to-day practices, and so on. And it looms large, In Northern Ireland, we would certainly be aware that, pastoral has a significant contribution to make to raising standards, raising results, and so on. So rightly so, I think we put a focus on it. I always think it's a little bit like the tide that raises all the boats in the harbour. So, why not put a lot of effort into that tide, If every child, for example, that we taught, if every child were confident, enterprising, self-reliant, self-assured, wouldn't every subject benefit from that? All grades in all subjects would surely rise. So I think it's absolutely crucial. I do understand that there are enormous pressures on teachers, on management, on schools. Parents put pressure on, and that pressure is for results, of course. And that's only one of the pressures. You've Ofsted pressures, you've people coming in to look at you, to measure you, and to walk away throwing back a one-word assessment of what you're like. And I understand that to invest in something like the pastoral, when you have to get X, Y, and Z done by the end of the month, can seem counterproductive. It can seem a bit of a waste of time. But it generally isn't, is the short answer. But there is a job maybe to be done to persuade a lot of teachers, a lot of managements, governors, and others, those people I mentioned. There is a job to be done to persuade them of the value of the pastoral. And again, and you'll realize I like my metaphors and my stories. It's a little bit like, the Karate Kid and Mr. Miyagi, and he tells him to go out and he has to, polish the car, and it's wax on, it's wax off. And, the Karate Kid's absolutely exhausted and his arms are wrecked and he doesn't understand. It's not linking up and it's not making sense for him. And he just can't get this. And he's about to throw the towel in and walk away. And of course, they go to the competition and he's supremely trained. But he didn't realize all the while just the value of what he was doing. And I do think that if you're a busy mathematician, geographer, historian, languages teacher, and you've got your absolutely packed curriculum, you've got your GCSEs and your A-levels come, I can understand that you want to drive your class really, really hard. And, form class in the morning or registration and so on, and some child coming with an issue or a difficulty, or, a vice principal comes down and tells you there's an issue with that class, you need to address that before you do A, B, and C. I can understand how that puts pressure on teachers. But in my experience, and, I could point to an awful lot of people who are convinced that sorting issues and so on, doing it first, is a much better way of clearing children's minds of worries and stresses, so that then they focus on you, they give attention, they do the work much better. And, Ben, I'd like to say as well, people think the pastoral is a lot to do with deficiency and problem solving and managing things like drugs or behavior and this and that. And that is all true. It is all, it is a lot to do with that. But I think it's much more than just the deficiency aspects that children in society and schools have to deal with. There's a lot to do, with ambition. The 3 schools I taught in here in Northern Ireland, I was head of careers in all of them, because I think, there's a lot about helping children to see clear pathways for themselves, allowing them to see a clear route ahead, and then helping them and supporting them, both directly and through your subjects, to kind of fulfill, their ambition and their drive towards something. So yes, I think there are difficulties. Okay, there's no doubt about that. But the wise teacher will be a Mr. Miyagi, and he will understand that, sorting things out, helping children with the pastoral, having a good, strong vision of what it's about, in the end, brings great results.
Paula, I don't think there are going to be too many teacher-led podcasts this year, maybe even in the next couple of years, that are going to relate pastoral care to the Mr. Miyagi story you've just told. But yeah, if people are listening and they've not seen the movie, The Lion King is fantastic. So go out and check that one, because it's a really good one. No, I'm joking. It's obviously The Karate Kid, but it's it's a good one. You're right. It's a really good. One of the main reasons I like doing the show is because I get to speak to a lot of different people, and one of the things that I really enjoy is kind of having my own views change and challenge and things like that. And actually, what you've just said about pastoral almost being kind of reactive but actually it's more about the proactive element of what you do is just absolutely spot on for me, because when you consider all the things that come under a kind of a pastoral umbrella, if there was such a thing, a lot of the systems that schools put in place and they want to create into the culture and ethos, which ultimately should be for the benefit of the pupils in that school. And we all know that there are schools out there that don't do it for those, to a separate pod on that, but actually creating that culture and that kind of this desire to want to make the school building the best it can be for the pupils that use it most is absolutely vital. And that's a really, really interesting point about being proactive and not just dealing with the kind of the negative element of, or the perceived negative element of pastoral care. So yeah, I mean that's a really pertinent point, I think, in terms of talking from a Northern Irish point of view now, in terms of kind of guidance for teachers, whether they're experienced, whether they're new, whether they're class teachers, whether they're classroom support assistants, kind of how is that guidance filtered down from the top echelons of the Northern Irish Education Department to school level? Do you have any understanding or idea of how that operates? Because I think it's quite good for people to listen to how that works, really.
Well, I suppose in the old days it used to happen through people like me who, when I was an education advisor, schools would contact me and I would go out, I would listen to the management of the school, I would get a sense of what they wanted to achieve, what maybe they needed, and I would negotiate some in-service with them. It could be a day, could be 3 days, could even be a week. Could maybe be a week spread over a year or something like that. And that's how it would have happened in the old days. Cutbacks and so on and so forth have meant that our support services are really pared back to next to nothing. Universities have, well, they might contribute a little bit, but people would need to come and do a master's course with the likes of me or someone like that. But universities really have other work to do and they need to focus on their students. In Northern Ireland, and again, we'll talk a little bit about this on Thursday night. In Northern Ireland, we have a kind of concept, if you like, called Every School a Good School. It's a kind of a program of raising standards across the board. And there's a document in that kind of clutch or set of documents called Learning Leaders. And one of the things that Learning Leaders promotes is what you might call the cascade model. In other words, you observe good practice somewhere and you would maybe go along to that school or that individual who might then lead some in-service in an area learning community. An area learning community would be a cluster of schools that maybe work together and so on. I suppose that's how, outside of academia, that's really how pastoral is shared and kind of inspired, and teachers get their training and so on nowadays. It's fine in the climate where there isn't much money and there aren't advisors and that strong sense of a single strong vision and leadership who can go into schools and take in service and inspire staff and really change the direction of a management. In the absence of that, the cascade model is fine. It works well. I suppose it's limited in time. Schools and area learning communities have lots and lots of priorities. They don't always put pastoral at the center of those priorities. So, that's more the pity, but that's how it is at the minute.
Did you enjoy the advisory role that you did, particularly with the pastoral element? Did you feel like, it was, it sounds cheesy, but did you feel like it was kind of satisfying and you were getting a lot out of it? Or was it one of those things that you'd kind of you'd start with the school and you'd kind of help them to put things in place. Because we've all worked with advisors that basically don't know what they're doing and go, right, I'm going to come in for a day and drop it in and then leave. But did you kind of get satisfaction from seeing those changes slowly but surely? Because pastoral is kind of the long game, isn't it? It's not something that you can look at in terms of curriculum and go changes pretty quickly. The pastoral is, as you've said time and again, and I personally feel you're absolutely spot on to say it. It's a culture thing, right? So did you kind of enjoy that role? Because you sound to me like someone who wants to see things or wanted to see things through all the way, in terms of being there and kind of changing that culture from the ground up. Was that something that you were able to do, or was it a little bit more tricky in that kind of advisory role?
No, that's absolutely right, Ben. The pastoral is a depth charge, and you just drop it in and it sinks slowly to the bottom, and then it radiates out this wealth of climate change, culture change, direction, and over a period of time you begin to see the fruition of that. You're absolutely spot on as well. I absolutely loved that job. I think even outside of teaching and students and young people in the classroom, I think that was my favorite and best and probably most rewarding time in my career. I have a belief, you see, that if you make teachers great, then almost automatically consequently, you're having a huge positive influence on the students that they teach. So great people, I think, become great teachers. And I think it's absolutely vital that all leadership, all government invests immensely in teachers. Teachers are far too important not to be invested in. And look, it's very difficult it's a bit like riding a bicycle. It's a lot easier to get on and try it than it is to describe, how it is to ride a bicycle. People got a little glimpse, during lockdowns, they got a little glimpse into what teaching's like. They maybe helped their own children to do some maths or languages and so on and so forth. And gosh, they found it difficult. And if you read the social media of the time, they were complaining and they're pulling their hair out and this, that, and the other. But teachers do that all day, every day, not just for their own 1 or 2 children, but they do it for classrooms of 20, 25, 30 children. And they do it day in, day out, and they do it miraculously well. If you look at any given year in any given class, you look at September, and you look where that class is then in the following June, those teachers have done a great, great job. So I'm a firm believer in investing in teachers. I loved my time as an education advisor. I think it's a very impoverished area now, but if we're not investing in teachers, we are creating a problem for the medium to long-term future, not only for schools and teachers, but for the children that they're teaching. And I mean, they are our future. They deserve our investment.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good point. It's I really, really enjoyed it, and I think what you just said there, listening to that, I personally, in a kind of perverse way, quite enjoyed lockdown for a lot of respects. For the position our school was in at that time, it gave us space, it gave us time to reflect and change and move things forward. But you're right. I think there was probably, certainly from parents, I wouldn't say particularly from anyone in government, but certainly from parents, I've noticed there's been a definite shift in respect. Is kind of a bit of a big word, but the kind of the appreciation for what goes on. And that doesn't mean walking in every Friday with bars of chocolate for teachers, but just the kind of, actually, do you know what, all the stuff I was complaining about before probably isn't that important now I've been on the other side of it. So that is a really good point. And I think certainly it's one of those where we're in a situation now with a number of political kind of agendas, but the pastoral element of children's lives and what they're experiencing in 2023 is far beyond anything that I probably trained or kind of experienced in the first few years I was teaching. So it's really it's a really good point. We're going to go to a news break now, and that's going to play for 6 or 7 minutes or so, and then we'll come straight back and we'll talk to Paul a little bit more widely about the education sphere and how things are going over in Northern Ireland, but also in this country as well. So we'll be right back on The Twilight Show with me, Ben Thomas.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out! Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading!
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
In union news, Daniel Kebede has been elected leader of the National Education Union. The union is the largest teachers' union and has been at the forefront of industrial action over teachers' pay in recent months. Mr. Kebede said in a statement, after taking 69% of the vote to win the election, "I am honoured to have been elected as General Secretary. I would like to thank everyone who has supported and campaigned for me." He went on to talk about the need for fundamental change in education, and that this included an end to real terms pay cuts, an end to massive overwork of staff, the end of punitive Ofsteds, and an increase in school funding. He also thanked current Joint General Secretaries Kevin Courtney and Dr Mary Bousted for their inspiring leadership over the last 6 years. They will step down at the end of August. The BBC reports that, according to a leaked government document, almost a quarter of teachers in England are working 12-hour days, with around 60% of teachers saying they were doing 60 hours a week or more. The research by the Department for Education was carried out during spring 2022, but the findings have not been officially made public. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan has said that a new task force will be created to help reduce teachers' workload by an average of 5 hours per week. The leak comes as teaching unions consult members in England on a new pay offer, which includes the promise to reduce workload. The leaked document, marked confidential and given the title Working Lives of Teachers and Leaders, was produced by the DfE to examine issues around teacher supply, recruitment and retention. More than 11,000 teachers and leaders across primary and secondary were questioned. The report found 1 in 4 teachers were considering leaving the state sector within the next 12 months. Workload was the key factor in this decision. 3/4 said they spent too much time on paperwork. 2/3 of leaders said they spent too much time responding to government policy changes. 1 in 5 said they had low satisfaction in their working life, whilst almost a half rated their anxiety levels as high. Almost 3/4 of teachers described their workload as unacceptable. Dr Mary Bousted of the NEU accused ministers of withholding important information from the peer review body, although the government denied this. A spokesperson for the government insisted that the recent pay offer of 4.3% plus a £1,000 one-off payment was fair and reasonable. The Department for Education has released an update site focusing on the review of the way relationship, sex and health education is delivered. The update comes after a number of stories across media outlets prompted concern and outrage from some quarters and claims that hysteria is being whipped up by right-wing agitators from others. RSHE education has been compulsory for pupils in primary schools since September 2020. In secondary schools, relationships and sex education must be taught. The review, which will be completed by an expert panel, will focus on how to ensure pupils have access to age-appropriate information and how to place protection from pupils being introduced to things that they are too young to understand properly. The panel will also consider how age ratings can be introduced for different parts of the curriculum. The review will be completed before the end of 2023. As we approach Easter, the debate about supporting families who receive support through free school meals should be supported in holiday times, and it's opened up again. The big issue raises concerns that despite the cost of living crisis, many families will go without support until term begins again. In what it calls a postcode lottery for support, many families will miss out as current funding largely depends on where you live. In England, the government is not directly funding free school meals over the Easter break, but support may be available if local councils decide to provide meals or vouchers. Many councils are relying on the Holiday Activities and Food Programme to support low-income families. In Scotland, some councils are offering free school meals payments to low-income families, but universal free school meals for children in primary 1 to 5 will not be available. There is some support available, but it varies by council, as does the amount of support being offered. The Welsh Government has made free meals available throughout the holiday period. The government in Wales announced that £9 million has been provided to support eligible pupils with a free meal up to the end of May half-term, including all bank holidays. The support will take the form of meal vouchers, money, or packed lunches. In Northern Ireland, no free school meal provision is available. The previous holiday hunger payments of £27 per fortnight ceased on April the 1st. A Department for Education spokesperson said it was because additional ring-fenced funding had ended, but campaigners focusing on food poverty said the decision was abhorrent. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Oh, Paul, do you know what I was doing? I was talking and I realised I was on mute. How ridiculous is that? Don't do that on Thursday. Honestly, tricks of the trade. Always have your microphone on. That's always a good shout.
Good advice.
You're back with me, Ben Thomas, on the Twilight Show here on Tuesday with my guest Paul Hazard. Eagle-eared viewers or listeners, I've completely lost the plot now. Will know that's kind of ever so slightly outdated news. I couldn't actually find the new one, the new news, if you like. I'm sure it's there. But Paul, I wanted to pick your brains on a slightly newer news topic, if I may, while you're on the show, kind of talking all things pastoral. Mm-hmm. And this was a report from the Daily Mirror. Over here in England, that reported on figures released by the DfE, which showed that more than 140,000 school children were severely absent in the summer of 2022. And it goes on to say, the article refers to these young people as ghost children and raises concerns that this pattern is continuing into the current academic year. The DfE says that the term severely absent refers to children of school age who are not receiving what they describe, in inverted commas, as a suitable education, either with a teacher or homeschooling. They are usually those with attendance below 50%. So what we'd call, persistently absent in our school, children below 90% who have missed 10% or more of their education. And I wanted to not necessarily sidestep because it's all part of the same process. But kind of your views on school attendance, really, because it's not, it's not just an individual school issue at the moment. For me, talking to, to various educators in schools, whether they're primary or secondary, that attendance at the moment is pretty bad, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems to be, doesn't it? Yeah.
It's such a difficult one to manage, and I just really, from my point of view, I just wanted to know your kind of take on it. Really, what your kind of experience of managing attendance, improving attendance, talking to parents and children around attendance was, because in our school it's a big driver at the moment, but it's difficult because children get ill, right? You don't want ill children in school, but at the same time, there are families that potentially take more time off than they need or should in some respects. So what tips or what experiences have you had with dealing with attendance, really?
Well, I think, people will get ill, there's no doubt about that. And they'll be so ill, they will miss school. But I think what you're really angling at there is the chronic absence or chronic absenteeism. And, I often think attendance and absence both have a lot to do with momentum. If you're a good attender, you won't want to take time off. If you're a poor attender, that kind of momentum follows through, and it can become very difficult and very hard to get back into school. And then, there are all the issues that go along with that. And it's not just exams and so on. I mean, where do they learn to socialize, and where do they learn to get on with people, and all sorts of things like that. I think it's really important, not easy, but really important, that school is engaging, relevant, and meaningful for young people. If they don't see purpose and meaning in it, if they don't see that it has something to offer them, they will, if the opportunities allow, they will not attend. And then, their absenteeism can become chronic. So we need to find ways, and I think that, they need to be serious ways that really have a positive impact. Now, it could be through careers education. In the past, we had a lot of success with chronic absentee children in a program that I devised. It was way back in 1992, I think it was. And we called that the School to Work program. So children who were coming near, school leaver age, who opted out or refused to come to school and so on, we did a kind of a bridging thing between employers and schools. So they might have been 3 days in a placement, in a work placement, and 2 days in school, or vice versa, or something like that. But we certainly found that once in the workplace, children realized that actually, do you know what? Do you see that teacher talking about maths or science or geography? That's actually really important. I wish I knew more. And we found that it did increase commitment. In fact, we used to have such success with some children, not all, but a few of them, that even when they'd progressed beyond compulsory school age, they wanted to come back. So I do think things like that need to happen. And we need to look at an education system that's much more appropriate, much more flexible, and much more able to meet the needs, personal needs, the psychological, the motivational, the career and the aspiration needs of every child. We probably clump children together too much and get them to GCSE and key stages and so on, and think, one size fits all there. It doesn't anymore. It doesn't. And children are very savvy about what the world is like, and social media keeps them informed of avenues they can go down. I'm not saying it's good necessarily, but they're much more savvy in what they want to do. And, hard pill to swallow, but schools have a lot to compete with. It's very, very difficult to compete with, the pop stars, the footballers, the social media, the influencers, and so on. And they just draw children away in droves. And they just kill off motivation and commitment.
I think you're right. I mean, the point you made right at the start of the point you just made about, building momentum and being kind of present in school. You get into a role with a project or a scheme of work, and you're right. Like, children just won't want to miss out because hopefully they enjoy being at school. And that's, that is talking from our own schools point of view. There are very few children in the middle of between 100 and 90%. We've got children that have been ever present all the way through the year, and I'm not for 1 second saying that that's the right thing to do, because as I always say, whether it's adults in school or children, if you're ill, do not come in. We're looking after people's well-being. You've got to make sure you're well enough to be able to do what you're being asked to do. But then we've got children that are kind of below 90% for various different reasons as well. So kind of, I think getting that momentum and kind of building that is a really important point. And also, the point you made about kind of almost fitting into school and how they see themselves in that what is essentially an organisation, institution. Like where do they fit within that? Talking about my own children, they're 8. I've got twins, and they are very, very clear on what they like and don't like now. Almost in the last sort of year, they've really developed that sense of this is what I like and this is what I don't like for these reasons, which is great. But I don't remember as an 8-year-old being really clear on what I really enjoyed and what I kind of really put value in, if that makes sense. So it's an ever-changing world, and you're right, that idea about schools kind of competing is again another good point in a list of long ones that you've made tonight, Paul. Really, but it really is true in the fact that on occasions attendance is because they just feel like they've got better things to do, and they don't, particularly for, I'm assuming, for older pupils, they just don't want to be there because there's loads of other, not necessarily negative temptations, but they want to do other things rather than be at school. So yeah, it's a good point about school having to to battle and kind of pitch themselves somewhere, really. Obviously, we're all aware of the legal duty of attending school, but actually, when pupils get older, they're just like, I'm just not going to bother. I don't like it for X, Y, Z, and that's where, we've discussed already on the show tonight, the pastoral element, the kind of the caring element, the nurturing element really has to come in, and kind of gone through this mind shift of it being, a weaker part of people's psyche and personality, and actually just saying, well, look, everyone's got to feel wanted, everyone's got to feel respected, everyone's got to feel like they've got a place within this particular setting. So yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with anything you've said there, really. And we talked a little bit there about attendance being a challenge from your point of view and what you're kind of involved with currently, whether that's in Northern Ireland or whether that's over here in England. What kind of challenges overall do you see in education? Like, what kind of things are you looking at thinking, okay, that's a potential sticking point. That's going to be something that needs to be kind of got over and moved on in order to achieve X, Y, Z. What kind of challenges are you seeing at the moment, Paul?
Well, that's a broad that's a broad question. There are lots of things. I know that was an old news, but I think just the workload on teachers is immense. I think that's a huge challenge. I think, as you say, attendance is a huge challenge. I do think, it would be money well spent if the government engaged a group of intelligent, well-intentioned people to look at how we educate in the United Kingdom. You see, I think one of the things that lockdown taught us was that children don't necessarily have to be sitting in classrooms in rows to be taught. There are other ways of teaching children, and they're very effective ways. And online, it had benefits, and certainly for some subjects it was more effective than others. I just wonder if the curriculum is fit for purpose these days. When you think an influencer can have, massive sway over children in one post, and yet teachers can work for months and have almost no impact. Something needs to give there. But I think you've heard me say it before, and I don't really want to pull it back to the pastoral if you don't want me to, but I always think, teachers are at the heart of this. Yes, we do it because pupils, and without pupils we don't exist, and so on, but it is the teacher who's at the heart of all this. And I just wonder, where's the pastoral care for staff? If we're asked to give all of this, to get all these results, to have this attainment, to chase children up for attendance, to put our hands in our pockets and buy meals and uniforms and shoes and do all sorts of things like that. None of us were directly trained for much of that. Where is the care for the teachers who are being asked to be carers? Because very few of us walk in, teach our subject, plan our lessons, mark our work, and walk out again. We do so much more.
I mean, it's a good point. There was in the wake of, you know, the author who actually, I think I've said this before on my show, but she worked in my local area, so she's very well known to a lot of people I know, a lot of people that I've worked with, and kind of the community in general. So it's been it's been very, very difficult time with that. But there was a guy called Dave McPartlin, who is a head teacher, and he was on BBC News a couple of weeks ago, and he made the point, you know, who's safeguarding me, you know, who's looking after me,
Yeah.
and who's looking after teachers, and that's exactly right. I'm sure it was Dave McPartlin. I mean, if
It was Dave, yeah, it was.
good, okay.
And
That
he was
awkward
great.
moment when I get the wrong person. But
Yeah.
he was. Well, you saw the interview, yeah, and he was brilliant.
He was
and,
great, and there was a fabulous piece in the Times there. I think was it last Saturday that he was part of as well. Super stuff, great stuff. Yeah.
And I think it's really there's a real growing momentum now. You know, there's a lot of really good extensive mental health training for, you know, staff to obviously implement in their schools, but also to be able to look after their own staff as well, and spot the signs. And, you know, you can never be completely clear on what's going on in someone's head, but actually the fact that there are so many more organizations and kind of training procedures in place that people can kind of tap into and use, I think is a real positive. And it's about, you know, in light of those challenges that you mentioned, because I would agree with what you've said there in terms of, not necessarily for me, but from what I've seen, you know, workload and everything else. It's looking out for people and identifying those you know, those kind of signs that might lead to a bigger thing. So it's good that this has become part of an everyday discussion with teaching now, and I think it's really important that everyone kind of embraces it and kind of uses it as a tool, really. I mean, in terms of those kind of those challenges you talked about, if we were going to flip that round, what generally would you say that you see are, you know, not just necessarily from your point of view, because, you know, you've come across incredibly passionately and you know, got an awful lot of experience, as we've said already, but like what are the positives to being a teacher still, you know, or being involved in education? Because, you know, for me, and I've talked time and again on my show about how much I love, but obviously, you know, generally speaking, as a profession, how would you kind of sell that to someone maybe new coming into it?
Yeah, you keep dropping out, Ben, but I think I got the gist of that. Not to worry. Yeah, look, I still think teaching's a great job. I still think it's the best job in the world. I quite often challenge, you know, teachers I lead and in service, or I quite often ask them, "Can you name me a better job? Can you think of a better job?" And they do struggle. You can think of better paid jobs. You can think of jobs with better conditions, but it's very, very difficult, you know, to think of, you know, a better job. You know, quite often, teaching gives us, you know, existential crisis, really. But when teachers and teaching is well supported, it's recognized, and so on and so forth, I often think it's the antithesis of an existential crisis. It's a very much a runway to, you know, purpose, meaning, satisfaction, and so on. And not to pull it back too politically, but I think that's why people in power, the government, and so on, think, well, sure, teachers just do it because they love it. Because we do, we are givers, you know. I always talk as well, you know, one of the things we do as teachers is, you know, we get a chance to make miracles happen almost on an hourly basis. You know, you get a child to understand how French verbs work. I tell you, drive home happy that day. And we do that. You know, we put smiles on people's faces. We allow them to see themselves in the best light that they can. We give them hope. We give them inspiration. I said to you, I used to be very keen on teaching careers, head of careers in 3 different schools. And remember, quite often you get children who would come in to knock your office, maybe a door after a class, and maybe say to you, excuse me, could I have a word with you? And you kind of see, and you look, there's maybe a girl there, and you know her, and you know, think, great girl, super girl, and so on. And she would maybe come and she would say to you, listen, could I have a quick word? Is there any chance, do you ever possibly think there's any chance maybe that I could possibly, I'm thinking of becoming a nurse. Do you think I could? And you're kind of gobsmacked because you think, oh my good grief, you would be the most amazing nurse. What is it that's wrong that you don't have that view of yourself and that sense of yourself? We need to set about filling you full of that confidence, that enterprise, that belief in yourself. And I think there are very few other jobs where you get so much opportunity to work so closely, so profoundly with people at that kind of depth and in that kind of a way. Everything else, or I shouldn't say everything, but a lot of other things, you know, they're task focused, they're task driven. But we get an opportunity to work at the very heart, the very pulse of what it is to be a person. I think it's a great job, super duper.
Yeah.
Now, if they paid us, maybe.
Well, do you know what? There was during one of the last strikes. Obviously, you know, people go on picket lines, and there was a really great photo of someone who'd made a sign, and it said, "Teachers create all other jobs." And that really, I was like, actually, do you know what? Like when you think about it, like a lot of, you know, well, most people's formalized learning, it happens at school, right? You know, unless you've got parents that are there sort of after school with all these textbooks and everything else. But like that was such an important point. And I think you're right. You know, that kind of story that you said about the nurse and whatever, like it you know, obviously in your role as a careers advisor in schools, but you know, that's what teachers try and do, right? Without sounding cliche and cheesy, trying to open up, you know, young people's possibilities to all the things that they could do in later life. And that's where it starts, that kind of love of specific subjects, of specific topics within the subjects. Really kind of starts from there, doesn't it, really?
It definitely does, yeah.
We're going to cut to an ad break for our fantastic sponsors, John Catt, and then we'll be right back to close the show when we're talking a little bit more to our guest, or my guest, Paul Hazard, to end the show tonight.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out! Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading!
Quite a few titles to check out there, so please have a look at that if and when you get time. Some great stuff. I've got some great books off that website, so have a little look. Paul, we're rapidly coming to the end of the show. And what you've kind of talked about in terms of the, you know, pastoral element and the kind of the specific features within that has been absolutely fantastic. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Being really nosy here, as I often am with my guests towards the end of the show, what, you know, away from your, you know, your passion for education and passion for kind of training new educators, what kind of stuff do you do away from, you know, lecturing and the role that you have at the moment?
Well, it's not nosy at all. It's important to know the person and the person you're listening to. Well, I'm retired now, which of course is great. I love it. It gives me time, and it gives me time to kind of do all the things I enjoy. So, you know, I like to stay fit. I should do a bit more. You know, I do a lot of walking. I live in Northern Ireland. I live in a place near Newcastle, County Down, and we're absolutely spoiled here for countryside. We have mountains, forests, the sea, lakes, all pathways everywhere for, you know, just getting out and enjoying getting fit, fresh air and everything. So I do a lot of that. I would also be an avid reader. And I used to read a lot of, you know, academic books and so on and so forth. But really, since retiring, I've turned much more to pick up one of my first loves, which is reading fiction. And I would read fiction in French and English. I'm trying to learn a little bit of Italian as well. That's coming on rightly. So that's it. Just spending time with family, out and about, walking, just enjoying life. That's what I do.
Sounds like you got a perfect balance there, really. That where you live sounds phenomenal. Actually, sounds incredible.
Fantastic. It's great.
So, yeah, if anyone's looking for a holiday, maybe check out that part of Northern Ireland because it sounds absolutely wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
Paul, listen, you gave a kind of a mini plug for your show. And you're coming up to your debut show, which is going to be on Thursday between 9 and 10.
Yes.
Talk to us a little bit about your guest and what kind of the focus on is really, and you've got 2 minutes to sum it up. I'll give you that free plug. How about that?
2 minutes. 2 minutes to plug the show. Well, Ben, it's the Late Show. It's this Thursday evening, 9 to 10. And we're going to talk about shared education. I think I mentioned it already. It's unique to Northern Ireland. Certainly in the UK, it's unique to Northern Ireland. It's a way of educating children, of sharing their education, whilst also respecting the backgrounds that they come from and so forth. My guest is Alistair Hamill, who teaches in Lurgan, and he would be an expert he's done some amazing things along with the other schools in the Lurgan area in terms of shared education. They've had a fabulous impact on the attitudes, the values, and the abilities of the young people in that area, really to extend their empathy, their understanding, to try and eradicate suspicion, and just basically to get along with each other. So
I'm really looking forward to it, and it's really good to kind of get. I mean, I'm acting like I've done thousands of shows. I really haven't. I don't think I've even done 10 yet on my own. But it's quite incredible how quickly you get into it, and how I've really enjoyed kind of doing my show. So I hope that this is the start of many, many shows for you on Thursday, Paul, and that everyone tunes in and listens to what you've got to say. From my point of view, I've really, really enjoyed having you on the show and talking through kind of pastoral element of education and how important that actually is. And it's really, really clear to me that even though you're retired, not that that's a bad thing. I think I'm just saying that out of jealousy, really, to be honest, Paul. You've still got a really good grasp of what's going on, but also the kind of the passion never seems to or hasn't left you, if that makes sense. And I think from someone who listens to these shows as well, not just hosting my own, it's great that we've got someone else coming in with a different perspective, living in a different locality and kind of really unpicking sort of key points in education. So, Paul, thank you so much for being my guest tonight. I really, really appreciate you coming on, and I hope you've enjoyed it as well.
Ben, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
No problem at all. Well, you take care. Best of luck for Thursday. We've got a lot of shows coming up. We're actually on a bit of a marathon tonight, really, on Teachers Talk Radio, because straight after me, Lucy's on, I believe, and then we're going right up until 10 o'clock. So, it's probably one of those things where you need to kind of eat something very, very quickly and then get straight back onto Teachers Talk Radio website, where you can hear all of our live shows and also through Twitter as well. And obviously, if you've missed any part of this show and you want to listen back, it is available through the Podbean account. Just search Teachers Talk Radio. And if you want to listen back to this one, my name is Ben Thomas. You've been a fantastic audience. Thank you so much to everybody for listening. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we will see you soon.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.com. Hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.